excited to be moderating this panel and learning from our esteemed panelists. I will try to keep this as short as possible from my side to hear from all of you, and hopefully we have a little bit of time for audience Q&A, though I've been told it's a very, very hard stop at 5:15, so we'll hopefully get there. So firstly, I think thanks for setting the stage, the district as a unit of change. I think an interesting balance between sort of a lot of the innovation that happens on the ground at schools, at communities, with parents, teachers, all of that. And then when we think about scale, it often comes top-down, sort of NEP, funding discussions, national discourse, where is India for tomorrow, etc. So firstly, really curious to hear, and Ayush, maybe we'll start with you, on why the district is an interesting sort of channel to think of delivering impactful, high-quality education. What is it about a district? Is it sort of the decision-making that happens? Is it the implementation and being closer to that? Is it a way that kind of creates more accountability? Anything else that you think makes the district a place to think about?
So there's a saying that India is a very vast country which changes every 40 kilometers. So district is roughly 40 kilometers. So you would, and it is a manageable population size of around, an average district would be around 1.5 million, so 15 lakh people in a district. There is homogeneity within districts. Obviously, there are exceptions to this rule, but homogeneity within districts that say that problems are not obviously same throughout the district. There would be an urban center, rural center. But then it is, if you look at like a habitation parameter, then there is a nerve center that is maybe the district headquarter or an important town within the district, and everything around it pretty much links to that town for public services, for markets, for sale points for agriculture products, things like that. So districts do become a good nerve center. But districts also have resources. Many districts have their own tax resources. They get shares in taxes, etc. So problems can be arranged at a district level. But are the solutions at a district level? That is something for all of us to ponder about.
Really interesting, and would love to dig in a little more over the course of the next 30, 40 minutes. But Chetan, maybe over to you next. So as someone who's sort of indirectly involved with delivering projects in hundreds of different projects, many different cities, how do you see the district as the unit of change and through which you can kind of get delivery happening, and maybe specifically the role of CSR, NGOs, others as well?
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kabir. I think the question will have to be looked at through various lenses. The first, of course, is that what is the district pitted against? So what are the various units of change? The school, you have the school, you have clusters, you have blocks, you have districts, you have the state, and then you have the country. From this perspective, the district seems like an enticingly good place to start because it's somewhere in the middle. Okay, it's neither too small nor too large. So from that standpoint, it's an interesting place to start. Also, you can look at this question through the lens of administration and governance, where again a district, I think, passes muster because the DEO, who is the district education official, has a lot of power and a lot of authority to be able to drive changes within the district. But I think when you look at the same question from a more granular academic kind of point of view, from a more pedagogical point of view, that's where I think what Ayush just mentioned, that solutions cannot all be at the district level. That is where you will need to go granular. Because even within a district, and while in the context of our country as 1.5 million does not seem that large, but if you think about it, 1.5 million population, roughly 20% school going, is still a large enough number to not try and bring in homogeneous solutions. Okay? So there has to be, I think, it can't only be the district, but the district still can be a very important fulcrum from where you have to granulate the changes.
Got it. So it's really interesting from both of you that the district as a unit of analysis almost as we think of the problem, but the unit of solution might actually be even further down and closer to the ground. Samar, would love to hear from you from a funder's perspective, how you guys are seeing districts, is that sort of an evolution that's happening? Are you still thinking national or state is the primary channel? Anything that's changing in terms of how funders are approaching education as well?
So I think like there are different types of funders, and some are focused actually very closely to the geography where they're located. So many of them may concentrate in a set of schools or the district which is closer to them. But I think first, most importantly, I'd like to just reinforce what Chetan was saying, that I think the district is a good way to drive accountability and like governance-oriented change. But it's still like 2,000 schools, like Chetan was saying, 3,600 schools, right? So it's still a very large system. And when we look at developed countries, like, a school system is 100 schools or 150 schools. So this is like, 10 times or 20 times of that. So when we're really looking at changing, I think, academic practice, the unit of change will need to be different, or at least that's my point of view. As a funder, we have engaged largely with states and have really looked at districts driving the change up. So, working top down, but then looking at districts to, I think, enthuse the system and drive some momentum. I would say 2-3 things that we've learned. Like one, it can be a very good mechanism if you have good capacity in the districts, and I'll get into some examples, further into the discussion. Second, I think districts are not a great unit for large states. So, the states we worked in, Haryana, Himachal, 12, 15 districts. If you look at Rajasthan, you look at MP, Maharashtra, it's like 40, 50 districts. And like each region is also then very, very heterogeneous. So I think it's a good unit of change with a few caveats, but really, really powerful, I think, in terms of driving accountability, governance, and also infusing a little bit of competitive spirit. I think one program where we are working actively at the district level is actually the NITI Aspirational Districts program. So that's a little bit different from, but then I feel that, there it's sort of a tightly defined unit of which district make the cut and why.
Would love to actually hear a little bit more about that. I mean, it is a specific program, of course, with a lot of resources, attention, etc. But what have you seen work well there that might contain lessons as we think about taking, especially in the education context, taking some of the learnings to other states, other districts? What have you seen really work well there?
So I think what's worked for them is the district ranking. Just really relentlessly getting together data on performance of the different, and the aspirational districts program is broader than education. So it has many, it's more on the HDI indicators, so it also has health, financial inclusion, livelihoods kind of indicators. And I think the recognition as well as the financial reward that comes from being a high-performing district and being able to move that. So I think that element of, I don't know, some people call it gamification, but maybe that I think works well. And we have seen that work very closely in our own work when we worked in Haryana on the Saksham Ghoshna. So that was also like a district ranking program, or rather like a district qualification program focused on learning outcomes. And every block could self-nominate. When the block is declared, Saksham was the name of the program, so Saksham kind of means competent. And then once all blocks in the district are declared competent, the district is kind of declared Saksham. And then there was, I think, very healthy competition amongst blocks and districts to say, okay, I want to get there. And it also was a very high visibility program in terms of the chief minister actually personally felicitating blocks and districts that were making it. I think similar is true for the aspirational districts also, right? It's very, very high visibility with almost a PMO and NITI, it being really the flagship program also for NITI Aayog. So,
yeah, makes a lot of sense, and I think some of that gamification or whatever we want to call it, I think is one of the big lessons out of the aspirational districts program generally. I think we talked a little bit about this kind of accountability point, having DEOs, having someone who is really owning what happens at the school level. Ayush, maybe from you, would love to hear about how that actually looks on the ground. So at a district level, is it sort of just being an individual who people are turning to? Is it kind of formal structures that make that the DEO really take responsibility? Is it something else?
To be honest, DEOs are not really taking responsibilities, because what happens is the power dynamics as it works in the education department and the system. So the first thing is that DEO has a multifocal responsibility. First, the DEO is a regulator. The person is a school inspector. He or she is giving licenses to private schools to run. Second, the DEO is also functioning with regard to the funder. So, paying wages for government schools, aid for aided schools, RTE for, schools, private schools, 25% students who are studying free, so state government's compensation that goes in for RTE. And the DEO is also managing the establishment matters, is the head of human resources for all the teachers. So if you look at it that way, running an educational or a pedagogic system pan-district itself for a DEO becomes very, very complex and challenging. So even if there are responsibilities of, say, improving educational outcomes and things like that, a DEO can at best, being an administrator of a public institution, at best can maybe ensure that a set of activities, inputs are going in. Whether outcomes are coming out of those inputs, that again is a factor of people who have designed those inputs. So a DEO being an administrator is ultimately more focused in ensuring that, like the set of activities that are expected out of him or her are being carried out. The series of review meetings are taking place and things like that. And if the outcomes come or not come, that are very dependent on how the district is itself, how receptive the district has been, how persuasive the DEO has been, and all of those things. So, yeah, but district as a unit for change or district as a unit for education, districts are the focal point of administration. They are the head point for administration. That is where all the administrative plans are made. That is for across departments, be it health, education, and so on and so forth. And yeah, gamification creates an incentive for DOs to actually perform. Because ultimately, so there are two ways of entering government, as we say. One is elections, you win an election, which is a competition in itself. And second is you qualify an examination. So either of these two, everybody is naturally attuned to basically competing with each other and then succeeding. So when you create that as an incentive model where, a social recognition comes that you've managed to do something out of your work. So naturally there is a sense of, that I want to do something good.
Chetan, you had mentioned this piece around, when we look for solutions, we should actually go more granular. I would love to get some examples from you on where you've seen granular solutions bubble up and then scale, and maybe at the level of a district, maybe even a state. But would love to hear about any examples, experiences that you'd like to comment on.
Sure. I think in that context, the first point that I'd like to make, Kabir, is that while we can consider the district as a good unit of change, but I think the most important agents of change have been and will continue to be the HM, the principal, and the teachers. So whatever change that we are contemplating, ultimately it has to percolate to the level of the classroom, not just the school, but what really happens within the sequestered environment of the classroom is ultimately, what matters the most. We may have all kind of intent, right intent flowing down, but unless things begin to change between, as far as the transaction within the classroom is concerned, at the end of the day, you're not achieving much. So from that perspective, we just had a long discussion about how Mantra, for example, and the entire ecosystem that Mantra has created, has fostered, has been talking about these micro changes, micro experiments, or which I think is a very interesting way to look at it. In fact, we just defined these micro experiments as things which are under the control of an HM. See, as an HM in my school, there are certain things which I can do, there are certain things which I can't do. There are certain things for which I have to wait for a circular or a geo to come. But there are a number of things which I can bring about, in terms of how a parent-teacher meeting or interaction is orchestrated, how that is managed, is something which is in my hands, right? So that is a micro improvement. That is something which I can bring about. And once you have micro improvements or incremental changes becoming a culture within the school, okay, coming to a point where everybody starts believing, accepting, and then walking that path, then I think you have achieved a significant milestone when it becomes a culture. Because at the end of the day, a school is an organization itself, right? And just as there's been so much which is being talked about organizational culture, I think at the end of the day, this improvement has to become a culture at the school level, where not just the HM, but all the teachers have to get aligned that by making these kind of changes. And there are several examples to sort of illustrate this, which can be found within the Mantra ecosystem and also outside. Some that we as Tech Mahindra Foundation have been associated with working with small clusters of schools. So that's been our approach, to do more intensive work in smaller cluster of schools, including one with Mantra here. But we've seen that a few changes, like in Chennai, we work with a cluster of schools which organize on an annual basis what they call a skill fest, okay, which is basically where various classes, various children, they just demonstrate a series of new things that they've tried out over a year, and it actually becomes like a major festival for this cluster of schools. Similarly, we were earlier working in Thane, where a cluster of 18 schools used to do what they called the Ganit Mela, where it was all centered around ways to improve teaching learning in maths. So now these things, and you bring in the competition, you bring in that schools kind of trying to work with, but also competing with each other, collaborating and competing. I think these are things which can become lasting change. And then, of course, if you have the the authorities at the block and the district level sort of aligning and trying to then replicate it across, then you can see larger changes beginning to happen.
Yeah, and would love to push you a little bit more on that very last piece of seeing at the block level or even beyond that, seeing some of that replication happen. I know Mantra, I was in a brain date with Dream a Dream, a lot of other folks here who I think do a great job of getting those changes at that school level, HM level, and then starting to expand there. Anything that you would kind of want to see or kind of encourage folks to do to get that replication and scale happening? And maybe to tie it back to this district level as potentially a unit where that happens. Maybe that's not the right way to think about it, but any lessons or insights around successful replication of these really great programs that happen in pockets?
One example that I can give is, I was part of this design workshop for an intervention that happened in the Samastipur district in Bihar, which culminated into the idea of an Anand Shala, which is basically how do you create, happier schools, happier classrooms. And there, the key learning was that while planning for this program, there were a series of design workshops that happened at various levels. And at the cutting edge level, these workshops included parents and teachers, right? Now, I think that brought in a much greater degree of agency than had this program or any other program would have been just like a top-down thing. So having a shared vision in which you include the key stakeholders, the parents, and for that matter, if you're trying something for slightly older children, include the children as well, okay, in the process of designing an intervention itself. So that is something which I've seen that really makes a difference. Having a shared vision to begin with, having a very clear line of sight in terms of communicating it. So that because there are different actors who are, within that intervention trying to do different things, all leading to a same thing. And if it is not communicated or if it is not understood clearly what is the larger piece that we are trying to achieve, then again you begin to see challenges and problems. So these are a couple of things that come to my mind immediately in terms of having a shared design and having a very clear communication as to what is being achieved.
Samar, I saw you nodding vigorously. Anything you'd add from your own experience?
So I think 2 points. One, I feel that just the capacity or like the intrinsic drive of the district officials is a big lever. So you'll have some districts where you'll have some high performers like Ayush. And I think I was in Punjab a couple of weeks ago, and an organization which is actually part of this Mantra family, Sanji Sikhya, was telling us that they're running a program. It's like a youth leadership program which they run in 3 districts, and it's really focused on building capacity of the teacher and the community to understand and, like really drive home that mindset shift that education is important. So it's a deep program, and then in each district they're doing about, I want to say, maybe 15 to 20 blocks. So they're not really saturating the whole district. But in one of those districts, which happened to be my home district, so I was super proud, the DEO and the ADC said, okay, we will take this and now we will use our own sort of this thing to just replicate this model without you guys having to deploy additional fellows. And I think I was trying to explore a little bit on why this district, and it was only because the DEO had been there for 3 years and was very, very committed. So I think that is just something that we have to acknowledge, that district capacity is very, very important to driving it. Some places you'll find it, the other places we have to find a way of making it available. The other thing I feel which is important to accelerate or sort of broad-base that change is we spend a lot of time talking about ki ye karna hai, or reporting against a certain scorecard, but not enough time on collating the learnings on what's working, right? And I think in the discussion earlier, Ayush had said that it's more like we're not communicating back what's happening and what's working. So that learning layer is also very important, because we also feel that I have passed my exam, my job is done, right? I've crossed this, now I'm on this ranking, I'm done. But having that culture, that is the only thing. Otherwise, everyone is doing it again for the first time and then taking their own sweet time to figure things out.
Yeah, and Ayush, going back to, I liked how you framed it as elections are very competitive and IAS exams are also very competitive. Clearly, that's something that drives leaders at a district level, that kind of competition gamification. What else is it that can create, I think someone mentioned capacity, but I think I also heard a little bit around kind of that, having folks who are just fired up about delivering, and of course, you said the outcome side is what they can control and keep track of, but assuming that is going to lead to impact, what are other things that help drive that? And another way of asking my question is how do we create more Ayushs?
Firstly, I don't think you want to create more Ayushs. This is okay. Couple of things before I get to answering your question directly. You were asking him about how things can bubble up. In India, we are not a country of revolutions. We've never had a revolution in India. We are a country of micro changes, and that is how we are. And second thing is that in India, a policy that is framed follows practice. So, if you want to get a policy in place, there needs to be a successful practice. And if you are a very rich funder like the 2 people I have here on my left, so the best way of you driving change in a macro policy is that you say that I'm going to fund this pilot here. This is something I really believe in. Do a visible demonstration of that. And you would see that once you see visible outcomes of those, obviously it becomes, and that is what becomes practice. It could be education, it could be health, it could be any other sector. International organizations like World Bank, etc., have played this game for a very long time. And now CSR, as the ticket size is becoming bigger and bigger, many CSRs are having massive impact on, and NGOs, and by that ground are having massive impact on trying to push policy changes. And policy is what becomes sustainable because it gets budgetized in public finance, it goes forward. Now the question is, what incentivizes a district official? The answer is, there is nothing that really incentivizes a district official. Regardless of how much you work and you not work, you get the same salary. So there is no financial outcome of working very hard. Let's say you work very hard, you get what is called a bit of social recognition. But then too much of social recognition puts you on a path of of conflict with your minister. Because he would be very frank in telling me that you're not going to fight an election, I have to fight an election. So you stop taking credit for whatever good has happened. So as a district official, for everything that works, we say that because the minister was so behind us all the time and driving us, and he was telling us that this is exactly what we wanted to be done, and that is why we actually did this. And somebody tweeting about this can definitely get me into trouble tomorrow. Oh, this is being recorded, yeah. But the fact that I'm speaking in English, I'm very sure that nobody is going to hear it. So, exercising my freedoms too much is also not a very good idea. Yeah, but but having said that, I'm glad a few of you woke up after this. So hi. So having said that, yeah. So what incentivizes? So you could say that you'd make a big name. You know, that could be an incentive. So like I have worked on education. You guys have been kind enough to call me to Bangalore and give me an air ticket and all of those things. So that is an incentive. But really there's no incentive. Your transfers are not linked to performance. So a national awardee teacher may not even be posted to a place that he or she wants to be posted to. You may get social recognition, but too much of social recognition again backfires on you because jealousy starts. And there's no financial incentive that is there. So honestly, performance or not performance, all you get is brickbats for not performing. And brickbats is basically you have a table like aspirational district program. So if you're there are 115 aspirational district, and if your delta ranking is just 115th, all you happen is you get shouted on that you're just not performing. And you're like, हाँ sir, बहुत problem है, क्या कर सकते हैं? But then you also know back of your head that ठीक है, you kick me out of here, but who are you going to get in my place here? Because yeah, so creating incentive in public administration is not a question that is limited to education in itself. It is a much larger problem, and you need to be self-motivated. And can you find somebody in the bureaucracy? So I'm like, for example, I'm expected to spend about 36 years of my life in the bureaucracy. So how do you ensure that I'm motivated for 36 full years constantly without ever losing motivation? So it is something that Dalberg should think about.
It's a tough one. Maybe one last question for all three of you, and then we have 10 minutes or so for questions from the audience. Some of you brought up this point, and you know, Ayush, you were mentioning it earlier around not just stopping at what are the metrics, what have we reached, but actually going beyond that and sharing and kind of putting that into practice. Chetan, from your experience as well, I think this I assume is something that you've struggled with in the past. Any tidbits, lessons that you've come across that you think would be relevant for the audience today? And please start thinking of questions as well, if you have any.
No, I think what Ayush just alluded to was the question of accountability as far as the bureaucracy is concerned. But my concern over these so many years looking at education grounds up is that, you know, how can you create strong equations of accountability at the very cutting edge level? Okay? If you were to just step back and think of education as a service which is provided to students as clients or customers, I'm just taking a very market example of it. And here you have the added ambiguity that you have, of course, the children and you have the parents. And so there you have a set of clients who are proxy, you know. How do you create this equation of accountability? Because in any other scenario, if I am not satisfied with the service I am getting, I know what to do about it, right? I can call up a customer care, I can talk to whoever that I want, and I can say I'm not happy. But I don't think we've really solved the question of accountability in the context of especially primary education, which is where, you know, it all begins. We've not solved the question of accountability, right? Because, and in this case, it's also that in our government schools, you know, where we have the parents not really paying for the education, it becomes even more complex, right? So this, I think, is an important one for us to think about. Unless there is a demand for quality education, which emanates from the parents, which gets reflected in the classrooms, in the conduct of the teachers and the HMs, you know, you are missing a very important piece in this whole thing. And I honestly do not have a very good answer to this even after so many years of functioning.
Any thoughts before we open up to?
I mean, I have a short-term solution is to actually create some additional capacity at the district level, which I think a lot of these fellowship programs have tried to do. Is that a long-term fix? No, because I think, you know, then it just goes back to like what are the real incentives for the public administration to perform, and I don't know whether we'll solve that in this lifetime. But I do think that's one way to infuse like fresh energy the fellows are constantly talking to each other, they have their own community, and the learning also gets shared. So I mean, I found that to be one way to really drive and empower districts to do what they should be, but I think sometimes they're just capacity constrained because there's so much going on.
Okay. Anyone in the audience? Yes, back there first, yeah.
Hi, my name is Saurav. I work with Mantra for Change. Thank you so much for demotivating us not to think about district transformation program by sharing that there are no incentives. They have to be self-motivated and they are burdened with establishment-related effort. But these are actually true. I'm just curious to understand that why are we not thinking about leveraging the diets or teacher education institution present at a district level and just limiting or saying that DOs or DPOs only has to take charge if you talk about, let's say, district transformation program. So there is a huge academic layer which is present at a district level, and I think they also can play a huge role when we think about districts as a unit of change, and not just for the administration or governance, but for the academic related intervention as well. So just curious to understand, like from one of you.
The question is, why are we not using diets?
Yeah.
No, we are using diets. And diets, for example, in my district, I've made it very clear that whatever happens within classroom is the responsibility of diet. And diet does a lot of interventions with regard to teachers training, with regards to providing weekly study plans, with regard to doing assessments of students, cross-assessment of students, encouraging teachers on preparing micro-study plans, and so on and so forth. So it's not that diet is not involved. The question also is that ultimately education in India, or anywhere else in the world, so there are two ways of primarily teaching. One is a student self-learns, that if you encourage reading, for example, so students self-learns. Another is a lecture-based teaching. So in India, we have had a system of lecture-based teaching where there's a teacher and there's a student. All of us, fellows, education officers, people like us, all of us are just trying to motivate that relationship, provide energy to that relationship, provide a direction to take it somewhere. It could be up, down, left, right. I'm not very sure where it is going, but then, we are taking it somewhere. So ultimately, diets are involved. Diets are providing teaching, capacity building, teaching aid, teaching material, how to use the teaching material. The question is, how much influence do they have on an everyday basis? Because what happens is monitoring becomes very limited. So as he was saying, that we have a system where headmasters are extremely important. Of course, headmasters are the most important because they're the first layer of monitoring. And they are the ones who provide leadership. They are the ones who motivate, constantly motivate. And then we also thought of another alternate system of getting the public and the stakeholders, the parents involved. So through school management committees. So that is another mode of motivation. But the question is, ultimately, it is about the teacher and the student and how much energy we can pump into that relationship.
Perfect. Thank you.
There was a hand up here. Oh, okay.
So my first one really is, why does anyone need incentive to do their job? Right? You're doing your job, really. They've been paid and they should be doing their job. So, on the contrary, what you should have is punishment if you don't do your job. So, this whole thing of that they need to be incentivized in order to do their job well is something that really eludes my imagination. That's one. Secondly, when you talk to teachers, and we do a lot of work with them, the first session is always a long list of complaints against the management and about governance issues. And I have seen that, Ayush, that Pune I don't know, but I'm talking about from UP, that actually governance is so apathetic and so uncaring, and that it just flows down from there. When your management and your governance is so uncaring about whether children learn or not, why should the teacher care whether they learn or not? And I have not heard once that a teacher has been transferred or fired because the children didn't learn. Why are they transferred? They were absent when somebody visited. वो election duty में नहीं गए, तो transferred. Insubordinate, तो transferred. But never for teaching. So what is the teacher understanding? That, hey, the governance, the people in charge really don't care about whether the children learn or not. So I think it also flows from the top. We have to fix that. No point telling them, oh, you should do, if we don't do, right?
Ma'am, so I'll come for that. I'll try to explain this situation about uh, disincentives for non-performance. So what are the performance parameters for teachers? So when I was much younger, I had more hair on my head, and like many of the youngsters who are here. So I discovered one teacher who was teaching science for class 10 and consistently was ensuring that 95% of his students failed. So I went back to my boss, who was basically a guy holding my position at, currently, and I went and told him, sir, we must do something about this. This guy is making everybody fail. So then we said, we will do something about it. Then we realized that there is no, so to punish somebody, there needs to be a law that says that you're getting punished for something. And you're absolutely right that academic performance is not a parameter for teachers' punishment as a disincentive. And so if he comes drunk to school, he doesn't come to school, or as long as he's in school and sitting in that classroom from the time that he's meant to be, there is absolutely nothing about teachers' performance. Now, where does this come from? This comes from two reasons. Number one is, what was the primary responsibility for appointing teachers? Primary responsibility for appointing teachers was literacy. Literacy, the first thing was ensuring that there are teachers everywhere. That was the primary goal of our previous education policy, that you ensure 100% enrollment. And we have been very successful that we have 100+% enrollment rates in schools across India. Any state, there's no child, no parent who today thinks that we are not going to send our children to school. So which is an amazing accomplishment of our entire education system. Second thing that happens is that, let's say, why the governance itself is poor, is because we suddenly hired so many teachers. So when Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan suddenly came up, the number of teachers who were hired to ensure that, or RTE came up, that every 2 kilometers you need to have a school. So the number of teachers who were there previously were about, let's say, 2,800 to 3,000 teachers in my district. Currently we have about 13,000 teachers directly on the payrolls and 18,500 teachers indirectly on the payrolls. The people who are doing governance, so when we talk about governance, there are about 18 benefits that you get from the government, right from your recruitment to your retirement. So 5 at the time of retirement, 3 at the time of recruitment. So it is like this, and then you get time-bound promotions, increments, etc. So considering these 18 benefits, we, for example, tried very hard to ensure that benefits are given. But then, unfortunately, teachers are also the guys who litigate the most in government. So the number of cases that are pending in High Court against us by our teachers is phenomenally high. So I can't tell you, right from teachers' transfers to benefits not being given to seniority lists not being disturbed. So for example, we have about 247, we are talking about headmasters. So Pune has 247 posts of headmasters that are vacant. We have 11,500 teachers. So what is the problem in promoting them? So there are about, at the last count, there are about 7 stays from different high courts. So one has stayed that you don't touch this. There's another high court that has stayed in another matter. Don't touch the seniority list. So how do we fill up those posts? We fill up when, let's say, there is a stay from X person. Everybody above him has retired, or he himself retires. The next person is just promoted. That is how we fill up. So that is a problem that is also there. So one, incentives, because to be honest, India is not a very great police state. We don't really punish, and that is also by design. So it's not that every time you break a traffic signal, you are caught and punished. We are not like that. So every rule breaking is not punished. So as an administrator, I cannot have my teachers as accused and keep trying to find that every mistake he does, I need to keep punishing him. I cannot have that. I have punished a lot of teachers and others also, but I also find that every time I keep doing that, that's not a very good idea. Positive motivation is required. So not doing the job is one thing. What the job entails, the definition of it needs to change with regard to NEP. Third, the capacity of that person to do as per the new definition needs to come in, because the B.Ed programs are not aligned to what is being expected of the teachers. Teachers' compensations have gone up. That definitely is an incentive for people to become teachers today. It is not that we are not paying well. But and my last point is, we also need to ensure that teachers have, governance is good, but then how do we delitigate the entire ecosystem of education? You have just too many litigations, right from schools getting licenses to run, to fees being taken, to teachers' promotions, to XYZ. But just one of the most litigated sectors is education.
I think, yeah.
I wanted.
Think, sorry, maybe we'll do you and then one more question after that, and we can just take it consecutively. Yeah, we will take both together,
Okay.
and then we can wrap up.
So you talked about you being self-motivated. So then I had this thought, what is self-motivation linked to according to you? And can it be cultivated even in a small way through some program or intervention? Do you think?
I just want to remind everybody that 2 more panelists, so can you please just stop shooting?
Hello. Hi. So, so what I want to also understand is that we talk about district as a unit of change, but the CEO or the DEO cannot be the only person responsible to drive that change, right? We need a lot more champions coming in and identify those people, because an administrator, you all tend to move a lot more. There are some people who stay. They move in the same system, they stay. So how can we enable that piece for them to identify more champions and ensure their capacity is built to and be able to do that, and it's not hinged on an Ayush. So yeah, that's my question.
Maybe one, there was one last hand up. We'll just take that as well. And then, yeah, there.
Hi. Thank you. I think my questions are follow-up a little bit from the last one. So district as a unit of change is something you mentioned, but unit of problem, but the unit of solution you said has to be more granular. I think all of you commented on that. So if the unit of solution is granular, but the accountability is still at district or the governance is still at district, how do we ensure measurement of quality then at that granular level? Because the solutions become very contextual. They become very different for each of those micro spaces within the district. How do you then ensure quality check if the accountability remains at the district level? So that's, I think, for all of you.
Okay, let me just respond to the one about intrinsic motivation, which to me, I think even after the discussion that we've just had, I think that's where it kind of boils down to, that at the end of the day, in fact, I was just mentioning that, all the good schools that I've visited over the last so many years, the one consistent factor has been an HM or a leader who's intrinsically motivated to do something for his or her school. So that remains a constant thread. And I don't think there's anything, taking away from that. That has to be there. How do you create mechanisms within a system so that intrinsic motivation is identified, appreciated, recognized, and augmented, so that it kind of replicates? That's the key thing which the system needs to ensure. I think the one thing which we tend to sometimes overlook or not see, even though it literally stares in our eyes, is that the power of a good classroom to enhance intrinsic motivation is huge. Okay, all of us who've had good sessions with children, we end up being very motivated once you've had a good classroom. Now, I don't think that is something which is recognized enough in our system, because I maintain that the classroom continues to be a very sequestered, a very isolated environment, even within a school, right? So if there has to be a way by which, and you can get feedback from children. In fact, children even as young as grade 3 or grade 4 have the ability to, point out to a very good teaching session, and also one which is, so I think we need to find those ways to identify, appreciate, recognize good teaching practices. So that's the thing. And then, of course, you have mechanisms which can build capacity on an ongoing basis. You ensure that there is greater agency which kind of builds up the interaction between parents and teachers can also serve as a mechanism to augment motivation. So there are all of these mechanisms which have been tried out, but unfortunately these are still, I would say, islands of excellence rather than it being an ocean, which is what is required.
I guess I can quickly answer the last question, which was, practice is happening at the school level, but accountability is at the district level. I think there's a simple way to connect it, is just outcomes. Because you could just say that as long as you deliver outcomes, your practices could be very contextualized. But, so I think that can really be the common metric. However you choose to define them, FLN, grade level, whatever it is.
With regard to motivation, I agree. So one thing I see that, motivation, one thing that really works for teachers is social respect that comes out of being good teachers. So that is one thing that really motivates. In the private sector, we say that people vote with their wallets. So you would see that a teacher who's doing really well in a coaching institute, for example, he goes, and there's a lot of demand for that person to teach at various other locations, and he then goes on to start his own classes, which gives him that kind of recognition and this thing. Government teachers, on the other hand, also have this kind of thing that they are respected as teachers, as individuals, that they're doing a great job. So that motivates and that keeps them motivated. Intrinsic motivation comes from when you are creatively satisfied with your job. That could be a teacher, that could be anybody. And you cannot expect, no matter what line of work you're in, you cannot expect every morning that you turn up at office or wherever you're working, that people are like clapping for you and throwing flower petals on you, that, oh my God, this great guy has come. That doesn't happen, and that should not happen. You'll go crazy. So that is one thing that is very important. About linking parameters, now the karta is at the classroom. Yeah, but the responsible person is me. Now the question is, how much influence do I have on that karta to basically do a better job, and each of those classrooms to do a better job? Now, we would have roughly around, say, 7,000-8,000 classrooms in Pune. How do I ensure that 8,000 classrooms together are performing and singing the same song and doing really well and ensuring every child is coming out who's just brilliant? That becomes a big challenge. So what has worked in my experience is, number one, clear goal setting. Second is clear communication of that goal. So the better you communicate, that really works. Number three, you could call it persuasion, is follow-up. So it is not about being angry or punishing or anything. It is literally like, if you hear me in video conferencing, I say, I request you with folded hands that please do this. And that is something, because if I have to sit in a video conference meeting and not be shown in the red, so you know how, those of you who've been looking at the Aspiration District program, it's like a stock market. So one day your stock is up, the next day you could be zero. You could have gone on a trip to Bangalore, and on the Monday morning when the stocks are published again, and you're like, oh, I was in the green last week, how am I in the red? Because two other districts have done some work or entered data that they've done some work. Either of the two things have happened. So whatever it is, that you need to constantly be behind something, keep the goalpost stable, and ensure that you're driving something and trying to communicate that this, what we are driving is something that is important. Now, ultimately, who's the stakeholder in this education game? Is it the government? Is it the society as a whole? Is it the administrator? Is it the NGOs? Is it the funding agencies? Is it the taxpayer? Who is it? It is the parents. Now you understand, government schools not being good and this thing. There is an immediate loss of, you get free stationery, you get an umbrella, you get raincoats, you get shoes, you get uniform, you get free food every day, and then you get free education on top of that. When you decide to move out of that system into another system, where you have to pay for all of this and more, so the economic cost is just phenomenally high. And at the same time, today almost 55-60% of the kids are not in government schools. Private schools, we talk about improving education. What about improving private school education? So government school, we also need to do two things. One is not only improve the level of government school education. You know, we have government school systems which are phenomenal. The Navodaya Vidyalaya system, for example, which is just, Kendriya Vidyalaya has a very good input crowd coming in. Navodaya Vidyalaya takes in children from agricultural households and really pushes them up. Now, we have a Navodaya Vidyalaya systems, for example. Many Eklavya model residential schools, which is based on this, is showing encouraging results, so on and so forth. So, we have systems, for example. Now, the point is, those of you who have worked as a micro project, and those of you who have done scale. So, I know of many startups in this city where you started off doing a micro this thing. So, you've had, say, 10 outlets serving tea, coffee, or juice. And then you suddenly decided to enter into a franchisee model. And then your brand has an amazing recall value and everybody really loves you very much. How well have you managed to adjust to it? And therein lies the problem with our current, whatever we are talking about, problems with education. We just expanded so rapidly that every 6 minutes, I think we were opening a school. You know, every 6 minutes. So during this conversation, some 5 schools or 6 schools may have been opened. So that is one big challenge that is there, the scale. Scale that is spread across with a very, very micro, you know, the number of administrators over that scale is phenomenally low. And an expectation that you're able to communicate that well, people are interested and constantly motivated, constantly hammered, it is a lot of effort. And with the goalpost changing all the time, it just is this thing. So yeah. And NGOs, and you know, like a lot of you are from the civil society, people ask me, you know, we fellows do such a great job, you know, government doesn't work only, NGOs are amazing. The moment the N goes and it's just a geo government organization, it becomes, yeah, you know. Some of you seem to be fan of geo, but whatever it is. So the question, the difference primarily is this. NGOs can choose their problems. Like she was talking about an NGO run by my friend. In Punjab, he chooses that I'm going to work in these 2 districts, I'm going to address this problem, and this is going to be my scale. And this is limited by my funding, my manpower capacity, the quality of fellows that I'm getting in. Government is not, government employment itself is a social welfare program. We also have to pretty much run a lot of things when it comes in government, which is the scale and the problem is not your choosing, it comes to you. And then you respond. So it's not that we were prepared for the COVID pandemic and amount of oxygen that we were like, we responded and somehow managed. Yeah, so that is how it is. Now I've made everybody very serious, so I'll give them.
No, I think we'll wrap there. I think really interesting about the district as a place where capability, capacity, energy, funding, discipline can be injected. But I like that a lot of the conversation still went back to schools, headmasters, teachers, parents, students. A lot to chew on. Thank you so much to our panelists. Really, really interesting session.